Welcome to The Roll Forward, a podcast for the next wave of finance leaders, especially those looking to transform their roles by making smarter, faster, and more profitable business decisions using the power of technology and a forward-looking approach to finance. Listen in to learn how to get out of the back office trenches and become a more strategic partner within your organization.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Roll Forward podcast. My name is Joe Michalowski, and this episode is brought to you by Mosaic, a strategic finance platform that transforms the way business gets done. And today my guest is Paul Barnhurst, the FP&A guy himself. I'm very excited to have him on, expert in all things FP&A, Excel, modeling, things like that. And so just want to get a quick, Paul, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me, Joe. I'm honored to be here and excited to just spend a few minutes with you chatting today.
Amazing. Well, before we get started, and we have a good topic lined up for the tech forward among the crowd. Can you just tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and how you ended up starting the FP&A Guy?
Yeah. So, my background out of undergrad, I did an entrepreneurship degree. And at some point, I always thought I wanted to start my own business. But when I graduated, I'm like, hey, I'll go to work for corporate America. Ended up taking a government job as I graduated around September 11th, and the job market was not good. So I took what I could get, did that for a few years, writing government contracts, pretty quickly realized that's not my career. Went back to grad school, did finance, thought, hey, investment banking would be interesting, graduated in 2008. Not a time to find an investment banking job. I ended up going back to work for American Express, where I'd done my internship. And I started out doing report writing. So I did an MBA in finance and a Master of Science in Information Management. So I kind of played in both worlds, a little bit of tech, a little bit of finance, and spent about a year and a half doing report writing, some BI development, and then an FP&A role came open. That was a promotion. And I said, hey, I want to get promoted. I don't know much about this, but we'll take the job. And so I took it, and I've been in FP&A ever since for about 12 years. I had a couple different roles with American Express. Then I left there to go to a smaller company called Solera in the B2B automotive space, was there for about 4.5 years. And then about a little over a year ago, I went to work for a company called DigiCert. And during that time, I'd started to do a few things on LinkedIn. How it started is I was looking for a job, and I offered a guy who ran a website on FP&A. I go, hey, if you chat with me, I'll give you a Starbucks gift card. And he goes, I don't want your gift card. No thanks. What I want you to do is write an article for my website. I suck at writing, but okay. And so I wrote his article, and he's like, he liked it. And he's like, hey, I'll pay you $100 to write more for me. Like, wait, you'll pay me to write one? I wouldn't mind a little bit of money. All right, I'll go ahead. And I wrote a couple more, and actually kind of put some of them on LinkedIn and started seeing people comment and kind of liked it. And so I started doing a little bit more. I got involved in the FP&A Trends LinkedIn group and started running some of the discussions for that and started growing that way, started to get to know different people, got invited to be on a couple different webinars. One guy right out of Australia invited me to be part of a financial modeling series that he was writing. So I wrote a couple articles with him, and things started to grow. And then I started to get more serious on LinkedIn. Some of it was trying to find a job again, but also finding, hey, people like my content. First, I thought I was going to run kind of a business around Excel. And over time, what I found is I started to write about tools is I started to get the attention of other people on tools. And they started reaching out to me. I said, hey, I can differentiate myself talking about tools. And so late last year, a couple of vendors approached me wanting to hire me. One wanted me to do some content stuff. Another one wanted me to, be an internal employee doing different things. And another one was looking at an arrangement to do some content for them on a part-time basis, and some consulting stuff came up. And I went to my wife and I'm like, hey, I think I can turn this into a business. And she looked at me like, whatever, you're crazy. And about a month and a half later, she's like, yeah, I think you're right. I think you can do it. I'm like, all right, I'm putting on my notice today. And I did. And, I've been doing it at least part-time for 6 months now, full-time since June. So about 3 months. And I do training, content creation and consulting. And it's been good so far. I've definitely enjoyed it. So that's a little bit of my background and story.
Wow. That's an awesome story. I loved it. What a roller coaster at the beginning. It's like you hit every probably worst inflection point of the job market that you could. I don't know, real perseverance on kind of fighting your way through and finding something that works for you. As a content person, we're always looking for like true subject matter experts to like write the content. And usually it ends up being like a marketer who's like gathering information and like writing it anyway. I think it's amazing that you kind of took that on yourself, and you can absolutely start it. There's a whole industry of people doing it. So really cool, and just really excited to have you on. This is going to be a good one. So thank you. The story was fantastic.
Great.
I want to spend today focusing, you mentioned tools and kind of getting a push toward this, new path that you're on because you got to talk about tools. And it's really what I want to talk about today. You and I chatted before, and you mentioned you had this concept of like the CFO tech market.
Mhm.
And so I was wondering, to sort of set the stage, can you tell me what your definition of CFO tech is and like how this industry has grown in recent years?
Yeah, no, of course. So CFO tech, really where that term came from is Wouter Bourne. So I'm an advisor for Bourne Capital, and he called it CFO tech a lot. And that's all that venture capital fund invests in. And so he looks at it as it's technology for the office of the CFO, whether that be sometimes that can be some like, SaaS metrics dashboarding tools. It can be cash flow management. It can be a planning tool. It can be, some of these different accounting tools to help for small companies managing the contract, the accounting, the deferred revenue. Sometimes I've seen tools that are strictly around revenue management, right? So it's those different
Mm.
tools. It could be a payment platform that the office of the CFO needs. And they're more focused, particularly on the CFO, things that he may look at, tools around that. And so, you have finance tools, and I don't know that I'd call every one of those CFO tech per se. It all depends on how
Mm.
you want to define it, but that's generally how I think of it. Is it's really
Sure.
those tools that you're going to really help the office of the CFO and help strategically move the business forward and understand what's going on.
And, at least from my perspective, like some of those little like bubbles are much more mature than others. Like you have like a spend management with these like really big, like high valued companies that are all in like this massive race to be like the one. And then you have others, which is kind of where I want to take this conversation today, which is like the FP&A section of that CFO tech sort of market, which, companies like Mosaic, I know you do a podcast with Data Rails, like there are companies that are starting down that path of trying to be like as mature as the spend management space, but it's not really there. Excel has been the de facto tool for this space and all of the other ones for so long. And I'm curious, as an Excel guy, what do you think specifically for FP&A? What is the need for software as either a supplement or replacement for Excel? Like, what are your thoughts on this market in
Yeah,
general?
no, that's a great question. First I'd say Excel isn't going anywhere, right? It's the 80-pound gorilla, and Excel shouldn't go anywhere. It's a great tool, and it should always, at a minimum, be used for edge cases. And frankly, for a startup, it's sufficient. Like I do my invoicing, I do my budgeting, my, tracking my actuals in Excel. There's no point as a single
Yep.
business to go out and spend a bunch of money to get QuickBooks and a planning tool. I'm not spending $150 a month or whatever for that when I can do it, with the service I already have. So, I mean, that's the first thing I'd say. But the
Sure.
second is you hit a point where traditional planning, managing your data, your reporting, that Excel just breaks. And version control, we've all heard the term Excel hell. You hit that point where it's just a nightmare. And that's where planning tools come in. And they can assist with that process. They can assist with managing the data, integrating your different sources. They can assist with, workflow, with version control, with collaboration, those areas where Excel struggles. And some tools have decided to integrate with Excel and try to give you everything Excel gives you and also give you a planning tool. And some have said, hey, we'll build our own kind of calculation engine and way for modeling. And there's pros and cons to both
Yep.
approaches.
Well, that's really what we're gonna dig into today. And I wanna, to set the stage for the topic, really just dig into like strengths, weaknesses, and really like evaluating the vendors in this market. But before we get there, I'm curious, like with the background you mentioned, you've been at so much bigger companies, you've been at smaller companies. Have you been anywhere that used one of like the legacy players, like an Anaplan or Adaptive that kind of forged this path? Like, what are your thoughts on like kind of the original state of this
Yeah. So,
market?
most of my career has been spent in TM1, which is one of the original players, right? Owned
Yeah.
by IBM. They now call it Planning and Analytics, but it was Cognos
Yep.
originally. I've played a little bit with Adaptive. I demoed a number of tools when we were looking at implementing one and went through the selection process. It never got implemented. That's a long story we won't go into here. But the way I kind of think of the planning space, and I've talked about this on LinkedIn, is I break it into kind of three generations. There were the first generation of tools, which were on-prem,
Yep.
heavy code, long implementation time. and they could only really be afforded by enterprise companies because they were 100,000 plus a year. So that's going to be your TM1, your SAP, Hyperion. There's some others in there, but that's kind of your generation two. Then you had our generation one. Then you had generation two come along, which I would classify in there kind of, planful, adaptive, some other tools like that. And, some people might say, hey, some of them are are Gen 3 or there may be some, disagreement, but just as a general
Some
rule. And the
overlap
way I
there.
think about that is they tended to be cloud-based. They
Yep.
served the mid-market, and mid to enterprise. They were easier to use. You started to see a little more low code. The implementation time came down, but they still tended to be 25 to 100,000 a year. Now you've seen in the last couple of years with the explosion of cloud, with so much low code, with where technology's gone, integration is very easy compared to what it was. You use APIs instead of, ETL, all those type of things. You see these third generation tools, which are, all the way down to small business, fractional CFOs. You have some of them that, are focusing on under $1 million companies. The cost of the tools have come down. They're self-service, they're much quicker implementation times, and they usually take a little bit more of a user-centric view. And when I say user is not finance user, business user. And so that's really what you're seeing. And
Mm.
obviously many of the, the first and second have done many of those things and added a lot of that user and the cloud and different things. But you're really seeing all these startups bringing the cost down to where more and more companies, if they want to use a planning tool, can. That it's not cost prohibitive.
That is exactly where, I want to focus this conversation. I love the context of Gen 1, Gen 2, but Gen 3 is, it just feels like, as somebody working in Mosaic, like the competition gets tougher and tougher, like seemingly every day. Like there's so many companies entering the space. To your point, it feels easier than ever to actually get a product to market. And I hear you on like the general like aim of these tools as like, we'll make integration easier, we'll make implementation easier and things like that. But I'm curious, like you've had a perspective, you've gotten to see so many of these tools. What do you think some of like the standout, like if you had to name 3 standout benefits of these tools, what do they really excel at? What are the strengths of Gen 3 of FP&A software?
So I think the first thing is the way, a couple things, the collaboration. Many of them kind of, like
Yep.
Mosaic strategic finance. A couple of the different tools use that terminology. So I think one area they've really excelled at is making sure that it's a business planning process, that the tool is designed with the entire business in mind. They've also given a lot of thought to the data model and making it natural, like many of the older tools, and the why they take longer to implement, but it's also why you get some more flexibility is, the data model was a blank canvas, a lot of OLAP cubes, and you
Mhm.
just figured that's why you took 3, 6 months to develop it. And you figured out all the different data they needed, and you're pulling it in an ETL or writing an API. Where, what the third generation has said is we're going to create native connectors, we're going to create the business logic, and we're going to figure out how to integrate from day one your ERP, your HR system, and your CRM system. And in some cases, your billing data, particularly SaaS, Mosaic's a good example of that. Some might be data warehouse. So I think that's one area that's different
Hmm.
is the approach they've taken around that and, the structure of the data model, which allows a much quicker implementation to the tool. So I think user is another area where they've really done a good job. And then I think what you're seeing is, an increased effort of trying to continue to create more flexibility. And in particular, you're seeing a lot of tools trying to bring in Google. The reality is Google
Mm.
Sheets is making progress and inroads against Excel. It's a better collaboration tool. It's built on a much more new architecture, which gives it some benefits over Excel. Excel is still the de facto tool, but you're seeing more and more realizing Google's somewhere they want to integrate as well.
Sure. I don't want to derail us too much, but as somebody who gets to talk to finance people all the time, there's like a quiet debate of like Excel versus Google Sheets. And as somebody who doesn't live in either of these tools all day, I don't really know what does Google Sheets not have that makes Excel so much better? I feel like anyone who's like a real power user is like Excel is the de facto. So I'm curious, like just off the rip, like
Yeah, so
what is Google Sheets
there's a
missing
couple
as its
things.
own tool?
It has Power Query, which helps with the data.
Yeah.
It integrates with BI, so you have Power Pivot in there. You can create data
Mm.
models. those type of things. VBA users, you don't have, VBA, which doesn't work online. That's a little bit of a challenge. And I think also having all the power apps. So I think that's one area, but where it lags, there are definitely areas it lags behind Google. Google's done a better job with some of its query stuff around stocks, which is Excel just added.
Hmm.
Google's done a much better job with collaboration. It's 100% cloud. It's easier to share. You don't have to worry about version control in the same way, but they don't have as many functions. They don't have quite the flexibility there, and they don't have the integration across the ecosystem that you get with Microsoft for Google Sheets.
Sure.
And then the
Makes
fact that
sense.
Excel was there first, and so there's just a natural bias that that's what people
course.
learned on.
Yeah, I mean, like you said at the beginning, Excel is not going anywhere. It's basically, there's that joke that kind of floats around the internet sometimes. It's like, if Excel went down for like a week, the entire global economy would just crumble. And like,
Yep.
I mean, it's kind of a joke, but it's kind of true. to
No,
be
there's
honest.
really
It's,
some truth to it. It's
it
pretty
runs the world.
scary.
Yeah. So, cool to get your perspective on what the difference
Yeah.
is there. But I think it leads us into a conversation I want to have. Like, I think a lot of these third generation tools, to your point, they will kind of hinge on those benefits of integration and kind of user centricity and things like that. But at the risk of, getting a little away from the Mosaic side of this podcast, I want to talk about the weaknesses of this market because it's newer. Like, these third generation tools are not mature yet, and there's definitely gaps in what they can and can't do. And so I would love your perspective on what you think these vendors still need to figure out, just from like a high level.
So let me give you just kind of high level of how I think about the tools. And I think of them in 4 pillars,
Please.
which I've mentioned. There's data management, there's your
Nice.
calculation engine, which is your modeling, your budgeting, your planning. There's your workflow and your collaboration, and there's your reporting and dashboarding. The reality is to have a robust tool, it's a multi-year process to really build everything that's needed. And I was talking to one tool that's entered the market at the enterprise space. And she commented about that. And I had a friend that looked at the tool and he ended up selecting another tool. He's like, I can see the vision. And if it was a year from now, I'd use that tool. So what you're finding is, and it's different for each tool, they just don't have some of the things that those first and second gen have yet. They have some benefits, but there's just the time it takes. And then there's the challenge. And I talk to so many companies that are facing this is, obviously investors want a return. Many of these companies are venture backed. And one of the things they always like to see is I want to see that average contract value go up. And so many of these tools are going upstream. The more upstream you go, the more requirements your customer's going to have, the more development you need, and the more time you need. And so it's interesting to watch. Many of them go, we're getting pulled upstream. That's not where we wanted to be. We wanted to play in the small and mid, but we're getting customers coming to us and they keep pulling us upstream. And so it's interesting to watch. But, in general, I think the biggest thing they have, and it's different for each tool, is just, all the functionality you're going to get in a tool that's been around for 30 years. It's, each tool is missing something different. Like there isn't one gaping area where I can go, okay, every tool in third gen is missing this. Some are really good on the reporting side. I've seen some that are really good, really weak. Some are great in integration. Like I've seen one that has over 300 connectors, right? I've seen others that have one connector.
Wow.
And so, it's different on each tool. Some work great with Excel. Some work great with Google Sheets. Some are really good at, planning across the spectrum, and some have narrowed it down and said, look, we do really good with revenue and expense and headcount, but we're not going to do your marketing planning, your procurement planning, all the other operational pieces that go around it.
I think this is a really great conversation because it's so interesting that you say that there's no like one glaring area because, when as somebody like that's not in the work all the time, like I think of it in terms of like, oh, if there's just like one thing that someone can figure out, like that would be the game changer. I even wrote it in the question list that I sent over.
And
Like, what would be those like kind of game changing processes? I'm curious. Like,
there is
it's
one
crazy
thing.
to hear. Like, it's just
There is one area
holistic.
that would be game changing in general, and this is across all tools. As soon as you build a planning tool, you give up flexibility. Excel is more flexible.
Okay.
And nobody's been able to create a calculation engine that can give you the structure with the flexibility of Excel. You're always giving a trade-off. That's why, some say 80% of people who have a planning tool still do some of their planning in Excel or go back to Excel. And so if you could find a way to get the flexibility of Excel with all the benefits of a planning tool, that would be a game changer in the market. That is the one area that nobody has nailed yet, is really nailing the calculation engine.
Can you give me I don't want to put you on the spot, but can you give me an example of like a workflow you might go through where, you're trying to use a planning tool and you find, hey, like I just have to go back to Excel. Like it's just, what's like a good use case for that?
Yeah. So, I mean, an example years ago in one company I was with is they'd build a detailed headcount model and they'd put all the assumptions in there,
Okay.
and you had to go back to the developer to get the assumptions changed. And they didn't update them for the next year. So everybody just went back to Excel because it wasn't updated. You do a merger or an acquisition, and so now you have a bunch of new cost centers or departments, and they haven't been able to integrate that ERP with the planning tool yet. So you're all right, let's go back to Excel. So things like that, maybe there's a new
Yep.
product and the tool isn't real flexible of allowing you to model a new product. So you're like, all right, well, for that, at least that piece, I got to do some Excel. We'll figure out how we get it loaded. And so those type of
Yep.
things that often happen. It's just the business changes and the tool, there's always something that comes up where you're like, okay, I could maybe do it, but I know Excel really well. I can do it easy there. I don't want to be up till midnight tonight. I'm going to go to bed at 10 and use Excel.
Yeah. It's I have a 3-year-old and, she kicked the pacifier a while ago, but just think about like in parent mode, I'm like, oh yeah, she needs like the safety blanket or like the pacifier. It's like, oh, it's always there for safety. Like I know how it works. I've been
Mhm.
using it forever and like I can always go back to it if I need to, but it's dangerous for the vendors because, the second that happens, like it can start snowballing and then they never come back to the product.
Exactly. Like I like to say, if you're not careful, what you end up with is an expensive data repository. Because you'll still use it. You'll put the budget
Mm,
in there because you can use it from reporting. Like with TM1 at one of the companies I was at, we still did 90% of our planning in Excel, but we loaded it all to TM1 and we used TM1 for reporting of variance analysis and for putting together some decks. And so we used TM1. We still used it regularly, but did we use it the way it was designed or to the extent they intended? Definitely not.
the difference between like a kind of generic dashboarding tool versus like a true FP&A platform that gets to or takes care of that planning side. Because like you said, if it can nail the analytics, like that's great. But to your point, that planning side is really the game changer that needs to get figured out for sure. I'm curious, are there any other like wish list items? Like I know you've done a ton of demos of these companies, like flexibility on the planning, that balance is great. Are there any other things that you're like, I took this demo and if it had this, it would have been great, but it just didn't have it.
One thing I'm seeing that a couple of different tools are doing that I think is cool, that I like, a couple of added kind of sandbox areas. So you can kind of do some modeling
Mm,
outside of the data model, see what things look like. You're trying to give you some spreadsheet interface. So
mm,
I think that's a fun way of trying to address some of those edge cases and the flexibility that you get with Excel. Other things I know a few
yeah.
different tools are working on is different kind of query builders to allow you to
Mm,
access the data and do some of your own work with it outside of the model. And so
yep.
I think that's another area that will be really valuable because the reality is the average FP&A person spends 40 to 50% of their time cleaning data normalization. And that's a huge problem.
Yep.
And so the more that can be done to help with that, the more people are going to appreciate the tool, especially when it does a good job of integrating that data, bringing in multiple different sources, and then it makes it easy to clean it. That starts to add up and
Yep.
save a lot of time. So that's an exciting area that I'm seeing, a few different tools I know are trying to release things in that, along that vein.
Yep. Makes a ton of sense. I know that's been a focus or a topic of conversation here a
Mhm.
lot. And I'm curious what we've gotten feedback, or I've heard, skeptics of moving off of Excel worry about the transparency of the back end data. Like, finance, your job is to make sure the numbers are right. And yeah, like it's great to say my ERP is integrated and these are your actuals, but like, how do you really trust and see that those numbers are real? I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts on that concern or that pain point? Is that as big as, some might say, or is it like just a skepticism thing?
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, I definitely think there's some skepticism because right? We've been using BI tools for 15 years now. And, that data's been coming, 15, 20 years, the data's been coming in. I think as long as you build that model right and your data was clean to start with,
Mm.
then you shouldn't have a problem, right? Because you're just
Yep.
bringing it across. If there's a ton of transformation and manipulation taking place, then you better make sure you validate it, which can be done. You can go back to the source and
Yep.
look, right? Like you can run a financial
Sure.
statement out of your ERP. And if your planning tool doesn't match to that, obviously I'm not going to trust the data. And so I
Yep.
think
Yep.
the other area where they worry
Yeah.
a little bit is they know their data is messy and they know they're not always using fields
Mm.
consistently. So often they're doing that massaging and they don't have the ease and flexibility to just dump it in Excel and do the massaging. So that's where the real concern comes from. But that's where it's so important. If you're going to go on a digital transformation, and I love Francesca Valli, she's an expert in the space. She studied with
Nice.
London economics, and then she added her own third thought. There's three things they found key to a digital transformation. And first is change management, which I boil down to communicate, 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 and then communicate some more, right? There's the strategy. And then there's the third thing that so many forget is put your house in order. Tools are enablers. They're not going to fix bad processes. They're not going to fix bad data. They're not going to, put your stuff in order. You got to do that yourself. And if you don't do that, then you're wasting your money until you do that.
Yeah, I think there's the pain point that I've always heard anytime I've written about like that Gen 2 sort of the legacy now platforms.
Mhm.
It was that blank canvas that you mentioned. It just makes it like so difficult to set up that you know, you haven't done the work to get to put yourself in a position to use it properly. And so like, yeah, it's great that it has all these features and like you're mad that it's not working, but unfortunately, like you got to have your house in order, as you said. So I think that's a really, really important point for this conversation. And, one that can't necessarily be automated or software fixed.
Yeah, no, sometimes there's some heavy lifting
Um,
that has to take place for that.
yeah, we have a data team here that works with a lot of
Mhm.
customers. If they do have messy data, like we have experts that will help clean that up. And we released an ebook about CRM hygiene and making sure that your CRM data is in order because from what I've heard, it's the trickiest point because it's so flexible. It's similar to these Gen 2 tools where it's like a blank canvas. You can do pretty much anything in Salesforce, and if your data's a mess, like good luck getting any go-to-market insights out of that.
So I'll
So,
tell you, I worked for a
really
company
important point.
where we hit the limit of the number of columns in the account table. We had over, I want to say 700 columns in our account table in our CRM. Oh man,
Oh
trying to get
my
report.
God.
I was writing all my own code to try to get my reports, and it was painful. So yes,
I didn't even know that there was a limit to that. That's this is news to me. So what do you even do? Like what do you do in that situation? How
you
do you get
repurpose
around that?
old fields, or you tell people to knock it off. They finally put in
Yeah.
a new. I think that company put in a new CRM, but what had happened is they were trying to integrate new companies, but not standardized processes all in the same CRM. Don't recommend it. Just don't do it.
Mm.
Say no.
Yeah, that's we'll pull that as a little sound clip from the episode and just plaster it on somewhere. Just be like, hey, like you're thinking about this. It feels easy now, but good luck in a year or even like 8 months down the line. Good luck if you're trying to clean this up at some point. I want to get to a little bit of the nitty gritty of evaluating this market. You and I were talking, and you're releasing this sort of market
Mhm.
report that is revolving around a lot of the things we're talking about. And you mentioned your four pillars, which I think is a really smart way, a really good way to think about this market. But you mentioned that like every company there's no like structure to it. So like some company might be really good in one area, another company might be really good in that area, but in a different way. So I'm curious, like when you're evaluating these tools, how do you assess like what the actual strengths and weaknesses are in those categories? Like in data management, for instance, like how do you decide if something is like good at data
Yeah.
management?
So a
Because I know it's so
couple
different
couple
for each
things I
company.
look at is one, what tools do they integrate with? So that's the first thing. Do they integrate
Yep.
with what I need? And what's good is gonna be different for one user to another. Like some tools natively integrate with NetSuite.
Yeah.
Some are only QuickBooks, Sage, and Zero, or some. And so that's the first thing is do they integrate with my tech stack? Right? HR system, etc. Now, all of them will say, yes, we can build an integration, and they probably can, but that's going to increase your implementation time and increase a little bit of risk. And you have to decide whether you want to do that or not. Next is how flexible, how
Sure.
many dimensions do they bring in? How many different, data dimensions can I have in the model? Like I know of one tool that allows 7. I know of other that pretty much allows unlimited. Do you really want unlimited? Do you want your user to add anything and everything? And do you want only 7? Right. So you got to think what's the right, how much business logic are they writing? Like, does my data, do I have to calculate things a certain way? Like, or do I have the flexibility of creating my own metrics and defining those calculations? And so those are the type of things you have to understand and how the tool approaches it. Some will bring in data warehouse. Is that important? Some will even do the data modeling and the planning in a BI tool. You could do it all in Power BI. There's a few of them that do right back there. Is that what you want? Do you want to integrate it to that level that that's important to you? So in the data modeling, you really got to think through what systems do I need integrated? How much flexibility do I need around the metrics that I can define, around the attributes and the dimensions? How well can I define them? How flexible is it in the roll up, the hierarchies that I can create for different views, creating a department view versus a finance view? Because the way finance looks at it is in a chart of account, the business may want to see something totally different because I don't care about that chart. It's irrelevant to me.
For sure. I think it's a good framework to think about. And do you mind if we walk through the other 3 pillars?
Yeah,
I
not
don't
at
want to
all.
butcher it, so I'm not going to try to list off your
Yeah.
other 3
So
pillars. But so we've got data management. Like here's kind of what you're thinking about. But let's walk through the other 3 and see, how you evaluate like a tool in
So
each of these
I think in the
categories.
calculation engine, the first thing, you probably want to look at is, do I want to stay in a spreadsheet and just want data management
Mm,
capabilities around it? If that's the case, then you want to look at tools that have chosen not to build their own calculation engine. They've chosen to use Excel or Google Sheets. Like I have a friend that was a Google shop, so he chose a tool that integrated natively with Google because he thought it would be easiest.
yep.
And so I think that's the first thing is deciding that how much do I need the spreadsheet or not? And then next is, looking at the calculation and trying to decide how much, flexibility you want versus structure. Do they have a headcount model? Do they have templates? How do they integrate with Excel? Like some tools may not use it as their calculation engine, but you can build the model and easily load it to the tool. And so those are the type of things you need to think
Sure.
about. Can they support the level of planning I want? How easy can it all be shared? Is it easy for the business to go in? Is there easy ways to partition it off and be like, all right, it's easy to give that person their head count. They can go in and they can update it, and then the finance guy can review it. Like I've seen some that have, separate kind of sheets, like an Excel workbook for each department, different approaches to that. So I think those are some of the things you need to think about in the calculation engine. Also, hey, do they have a sandbox? Is that important to me? Do I want to be able to do kind of edge case type things? Or do I want,
Sure.
high level flexibility with very little of a model? Like there's some tools that don't start with the data model. They start with the financial model and they can bring in your data, but really the goal is kind of to basically give you more of that flexibility of Excel. So it's going to vary by company. It's going to vary by leadership, but it's asking yourself what's important and then going out and narrowing down that list of tools that meet your criteria. And then for the next one, reporting and dashboarding, most tools do a pretty good job there. The way I think of it is, the smaller the tool, the more focus is on very small market, the less flexibility you're going to get in a reporting typically. The more the tool goes mid-market and enterprise, the more you're going to get. But things you want to think about is how well does it integrate with PowerPoint? Can I download a PDF? Like some of the new, third gen tools don't have that yet. They haven't built that download PDF, or they don't have some of those PowerPoint integrations. They may not have the ability. Some do. Some have really thought about it, but have that ability to directly share your board of directors deck right from the tool to the investors, and they can comment on it. That's a great thing to
Yep.
have. And so, if that's important to you, can I create my own, or is it mostly reporting I have to choose from the tool? Like I've seen some that, they give you a little bit of flexibility, but not a ton of customization, you know? And so those are things you need to ask yourself is you need to think in 2 ways. Can it meet my reporting needs today? And this is across all of them. And can it meet my needs in 3 to 5 years? And if it can't meet the needs, is that okay? Am I willing to
Yes.
upscale at that point? which the answer may be yes, because, okay, I'm a $1 million company and I can get this tool for, 400 a month or whatever, 5,000 a year, or I can pay 25,000 right now. I'd rather hire, a part-time salesperson or whatever, right? And so that's to think about. And then collaboration and workflow. I think most tools are pretty good there. It's a pretty standard thing that you're going to get in tools, but you want to understand, hey, can I create my own workflow or is it all predefined? Can I have multiple levels of approval?
Mhm.
How easy is it to assign them? How easy is it to assign people to different tasks? Can I comment on things really easy? And at what level? So those are the
Yep.
type of things to think about. But if I'm looking at a tool, I mean, if they don't have, I don't care how good the workflow and collaboration, the reporting is. If I can't do the budgeting, the modeling, and it doesn't bring in my data, I can't manage those parts, I'm not going to buy the tool. So that's why
Yep.
I've listed that in the order I do is I think data management has to be right first. Then you got to be able to model. Then you do your reporting. And then, hey, last, you need to think about it. But I think it's the easiest to address is that workflow and collaboration.
That was a really good way to sum it up at the end there. Was like, I'm thinking, I know you call them like the four pillars, and that was kind of where I was going. I don't want to ask if like one is more important than the other, because I know like the concept is like that they're all like kind of important on their own. But the way you summed it up kind of to me sounds like a pyramid almost.
Mhm.
Like if you have that like base layer of like the data coming in, like that's great. And then like it all stacks. And like the little tippy top is like, yeah, like you have the collaborations, like I don't know if you're an FP&A tool and you're saying like our only differentiator is that we're really good at collaboration, and it's like you're kind of like weak on the other ones. You're probably not going to win this market over as much as you would like. So I think it's a really cool way to
Correct. I
think about
like
it.
how you mentioned that. I hadn't thought of doing it that way, but yeah, you could think of it as a pyramid, and it really the base is your data management, your modeling, and it builds.
Yeah, really great. I think, the question I was going to ask that I think you just satisfied for sure with that explanation was like what the checklist would be if you were going to say like, hey, like here's like a rubric for, whatever company to go evaluate these tools. Cause, as I was listening to like the first few things you said at the beginning of this recording, it was like everything is so nuanced. Like it's so dependent on your own business model. It's so dependent on like the little pluses and minuses like in each area, and I wasn't sure if there was gonna be a way to kind of sum it up as like, here's what to look for. So I think, the answer you gave with each category was really great. So it was helpful for
Yeah,
me.
and there's an article on my website, and I did a series on LinkedIn where I talked each one of those and what to think about. So if people go to the FP&A Guy, they can see that
Yep.
article that talks about the different things they should think about. And I've had a few people suggest creating a rubric. I haven't done it yet. I might get to that one of these days of actually trying to sit down and come up with, a checklist and a rubric that people could use to try to evaluate tools.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's why, I wanted to do this topic was that I know as this market gets bigger, like this is just something that's going to come up for, a lot of finance leaders. So I think it's really great to have your insight on that. I'll link the article that you mentioned. I saw it before we chatted. I'll link it in the show
Great.
notes so people can find it. I want to be mindful of time because honestly, Paul, you and I chatted a little bit before this. I could probably just like chat with you all day. Really easy to talk to. Enjoy the conversation. So this has been fun. But you're a busy man, and I need to let you go at some point. So I got two more questions, and
Sure.
they're a little more like high levels. So I want to zoom out a little bit. And I know you're an Excel guy. We started at the beginning. We said spreadsheets aren't going anywhere, and that's great. I would love to know what you think long term. Take away, you said there's like a 3 to 5 year. It just takes a long time to build one of these tools. In a perfect world, what is the ideal relationship between spreadsheets and FP&A software? Will we ever truly replace spreadsheets, or will it always be kind of symbiosis there?
I think symbiosis, because spreadsheets are the ideal input form. I mean, they're so incredibly flexible.
Okay.
It's why you see so many things developed in them, and it's probably the most used tool in the world. But I think how to look at it is spreadsheets should be for edge cases. Hey, we're doing an M&A
Okay.
activity and we need to model something. Hey, we need to do this, we need to do that. And what we're seeing right now is we're seeing more and more spreadsheet tools start to crop up in the market. And it will be interesting to watch how that convergence happens. I mean, I think the first convergence you'll see is
Yeah.
probably more around the data models Because, you think about it today, everything you're bringing into your planning tool is also being brought into a BI tool in many cases. So you got duplication and extra cost. So at some point, someone's going to figure out how to that data management, that data module is really its own tool, its own product, and you hook into it. And I think we'll see that first.
Yep.
And then I do think you'll continue to see improvement in the spreadsheets. And maybe some tool, eventually will probably figure out the edge case and it will be able to, it's probably going to be some kind of spreadsheet, right? Because many of the tools, you have a spreadsheet type function, even if you're not Excel or Google Sheets. So
Right.
spreadsheet's not going anywhere. I don't think Excel's going anywhere anytime soon, but I think that the way they need to live together is you need to get to the point where you can do all your core planning, your core budgeting, your reporting, your dashboarding in your planning tool, and you use Excel for edge cases and one-offs and other areas like that where it excels and shines. No pun intended.
I love it. I think it makes a lot of sense. Like my main concern always, like anytime we write about, new features or different use cases, it's like, will somebody look at this, get stuck and go back to Excel? So that idea of like having it for the edge cases and like having it be there, but actually being able to accomplish all of those core functions like on a consistent basis, I think is really important. So I like the way you frame that up. It makes a lot of sense to me.
Yep.
I have one last question for you. It's one we ask everybody that comes on, and so I'll appreciate you indulging me. It's not related to tools at all. But I'm curious, what is one thing you know now that you wish you knew at the start of your finance career?
I think, and it doesn't have to do with finance, but just in general for career, I wish I had realized the value of networking. I didn't do an internship in college. I didn't really network. I was just focusing on school. And it ended up taking me a year after
Yep.
I graduated to find a really career job. It took me a while after grad school. Now, as I've built a following and, built a network, it's amazing how the opportunities come to me. And so I know it's not finance advice per se, but I think the career advice is put yourself out there, network, and realize it's a
Yep.
two-way street. A lot of people think of networking as a dirty word and you're just asking for a favor, but that's not what it is. You need to make sure you're giving and you're giving value to the people you're networking with.
It's funny you mentioned I feel like it happens every time somebody comes on and asks this question. And I say this a lot. It's never about like building models. Like the idea is never like, oh, I wish I knew this Excel function like 3 years earlier and it was gonna like change it. Like you need to know that stuff, but I think the networking point is a really, really good one. I've gotten a lot of value from you on LinkedIn as somebody, trying to make content for a vendor in this space. Like I need to know what's going on. And like without people like you, genuinely just sharing insights and ideas, pain points, things like that, like I would only have selling context, and you can't just constantly sell at people. Like you have to offer that value. So I think the networking point is a really good one. And especially for a profession that has been deemed like the back office number crunchers, that's how for our points, it's like you get out of that back office, you do your networking, you offer value. And like, that's how, I really love the Business Partnering Institute stuff. Like that's how you become a real partner, is you take on that networking stuff.
And that's the
So,
fun part. Partnering is the fun part of finance.
come on, Excel's a blast.
Oh,
Look
I
at
love
look
working
at
in
the
Excel, but
Bible
if you ask
behind
me
you,
what I
Paul.
like
we love
most, it's the strategy, it's the partnering, it's the relationships, it's moving the business forward. Now, sometimes that can involve some really fun Excel models, but if that's all I'm doing,
yeah,
I'm going to get bored pretty quick.
rough life. Understandable. Well, I think that's a good place to leave it, Paul. I want to leave the floor for you. We're coming up on time, so where can people go to learn more about you, to follow you on LinkedIn, to learn more about the FP&A Guy? Floor is yours.
Yeah, no, of course, I
what you plug
appreciate
here?
that. Thank you, Joe. And so, first people can go to the FP&AGuy.com. That's my website. I have, a few articles up there and some information about me, some of the courses I, offer a little bit of that. Where most people will find me is on LinkedIn. I post content there daily. I also do a little bit on Instagram and Twitter, not much. Really, probably the primary space to follow me at the moment is LinkedIn. And on my website, you can find the contact information. If you want to reach me, you can always send me an email. I'll talk to just about everybody. I think before this call, I talked to a vendor about a planning tool, and I do it about once, twice a week these days. So
Perfect. Amazing. Well, Paul, thank you so much for taking the time. I know You got a lot of people to talk to. It's not an easy work. I did the freelance job for a bit, and so you've elevated that to a whole business. So I know the solo job is not an easy one. So I really appreciate you taking the time to share your insight about
No,
the market. It's
my
been great.
pleasure. I'm happy to do it. I've had a great relationship with Mosaic. I like what you guys are doing. As you know, I had the opportunity to train a lot of people there, and have got to know a lot of people at your company, and appreciate what you guys are doing. So keep it up and keep making a difference with the tools that can help us finance people do our job a little easier. So thank you.
Amazing. Of course. Well, it's been great having you on the Roll Forward, and maybe we can do it again sometime.
Sounds good. Thanks. Appreciate it, Joe.
Thank you for checking out this episode of The Roll Forward. This show is powered by Mosaic, a strategic finance platform that transforms the way business gets done. If you enjoyed what you learned in this episode, make sure to follow The Roll Forward wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, or visit mosaic.tech/podcast to get immediate access to all of the latest episodes.